In tonight's pre-election segment, we turn to the race for Suffolk County District Attorney. We'd like to welcome one of the 5 candidates in the Democratic primary on September 4th, Greg Henning. Thank you very much for being with us again, Greg.
Thank you for having me back, Chris.
I want to reintroduce you to our viewers, especially by having you talk about the work that you've been doing lately in the District Attorney's office here.
I've been in the DA's office a total of 10 years. I did it in 2 different stints. I did 5 years, and then I became a teacher. I actually taught 8th graders and 12th graders, and then I came back to the office, and for the past 5 years I've been working on homicide cases, and since 2016 I've been the head of what they call the gang unit in the office.
Well, we recently, because of the Washington Post, have put a lot more focus on the racial gap in unsolved homicides. It's quite large in Boston, and soon after, one idea you came out with was a special unit to look at unsolved shootings. What did you have in mind?
I actually started formulating this idea back in 2017 when I was running the unit. I counted up all of the shootings that took place in the city of Boston, not just shootings where a person is hit with a bullet, but also shootings where a gun is discharged and shell casings are left on the scene, or a bullet goes through somebody's window, even if a person isn't hit. And there were over 730 shootings like this that took place. So the idea I formulated back at the end of 2017 is something called an unsolved shooting team. And what happened was I ended up making a suggestion on this plan. The race for district attorney took off, and so the plan ended up becoming something that I want to focus on as a fully staffed unit to target unsolved shootings. The vision I have is 3 prosecutors to start, with the potential to expand once we have some success and some data that we can use to focus our efforts, as well as a victim witness advocate and a criminal analyst that can work on these cases. And the hope is that when we look back on the data, we see that many times it's the same person or the same gun being used in multiple shootings. If we can focus our efforts to get some of those shooters off the streets, we can help cut down on the number of shootings and prevent a homicide.
Now, what surprised me was how many of these shootings have been taking place.
Back in 2016, when I started looking at the data, there were 250 or so people hit with a bullet, which are the shootings that people mostly think about. But when I counted all of the gun discharge events, where a person isn't hit, where there's shell casings on scene, where a person reports ballistic damage to their house, there were over 730. So we're talking about sometimes 2 a day on average. And that has a ripple effect. The trauma that is felt in a neighborhood when there's a gun that goes off, it affects children, it affects people feeling safe in their home. Taking the efforts of the DA's office and working collaboratively with community groups as well as law enforcement to target those shootings is the vision I have for the unit.
Now, my first reaction when I looked at this plan was, well, this doesn't deal with the shootings when a bullet actually hits somebody. But then again, I'm thinking, well, maybe it does in a way.
It absolutely does. There's cases where we've had a person not getting hit with a bullet, but that bullet or the shell casing comes back through ballistic evidence to a shooting where a person was hit. And you can use all kinds of sources like forensic data, cellular technology, surveillance video to determine was somebody at both locations, are there suspects that fit a description from multiple shootings, and you can definitely solve shootings where a person was hit. And in some cases, it might be that a gun is used in a murder and later on is used again. That can help solve murders.
In some of the forums for DA, I've been hearing candidates talk a lot about scaling back on sending people to jail for nonviolent drug offenses. Maybe sometimes you agree with that, but I guess there are times when you wouldn't agree with that. What kind of factors would come into play?
You have to look at all of the factors that go into a particular case, as well as a person's background, whether they've been previously convicted, their likelihood of reoffending, an assessment of whether or not they're a risk to the community. And that's really the work that I've been doing for 10 years as a prosecutor, making sure that we look at each case on a case-by-case basis, because there's no one-size-fits-all philosophy that will both protect public safety and ensure a just outcome. Some of the work that I did when I was running the gang unit is to take a very specific approach to each case to make sure we're looking into defendant background, other factors going on in the case, and I continue to do that as district attorney. There's certainly cases where people should not be in prison and should not be in jail. We shouldn't be asking for and we shouldn't be incarcerating every case, and it's a very small percentage of cases where a person is incarcerated. If you think about it, the district attorney's office prosecutes about 30,000 to 35,000 cases a year. It's a very small percentage of the cases that actually have a person incarcerated, something like 4%. But our vision, our goal should always be to incarcerate fewer people. And one of the things I've been talking about is ways to re-engage and engage from the DA's office with the community to prevent people from ever being involved in the criminal justice system. And that's why I proposed something called LEAD, Law Enforcement Early Diversion, which is a program I would start in the district attorney's office if I'm elected, where law enforcement, district attorneys, and prosecutors can take on a mentoring role for young people, particularly preteens in the community, to make sure we help keep people out of the criminal justice system.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Greg Henning, candidate for Suffolk County District Attorney. Greg, another thing that's come up at forums is campaign contributions by police. You seem to have the lion's share of that, quite a bit too. What does that send as a message? I know they trust you, but what does it mean about public trust?
The campaign it's been going on 5.5 months, and I've been fortunate enough to get the support of people that are defense attorneys, retired judges, teachers that I've worked with, people that are involved in nonprofits, law enforcement, people that I've actually taught, former students of mine. So the support I've gotten is wide-ranging, and I appreciate all the support. And I think it's a symbol that the people that have supported me and know my work, both in the classrooms and in the community organizations that I've been a part of, doing diversion and intervention work in custody settings, in correctional facilities, as well as my work in the courtroom. It's all been marked by integrity and honesty and independence, and that's why people support the campaign, because they understand that the district attorney needs to have integrity in doing the job, and that's how I've always run my career.
But I mean, the scale of this, I mean, I think you have more money from police than the other candidates have in their campaign chests. Isn't that a lot of money?
I've gotten the fortunate enough to have campaign contributions that are significant because people understand that I'm specifically targeting things in the community that we need to address, that I have specific policy proposals, and it's resonated with people. We've had some times where we go out knocking on doors and we talk about the specific proposals, and people have made campaign contributions literally at their door. So that type of thing, I think, from all organizations, whether or not it's the people I've worked with or people that we meet in the community, shows that they understand I have the experience, but also specific provisions and policies that will make me more effective as district attorney.
I want to come back to one of the problems around the homicides, because you've certainly heard people complaining, not in the campaign, that witnesses are not coming forward.
Yeah.
Sometimes even victims aren't coming forward with information. What's the real concern? Is it fear? Is it trust?
It's not the same for every single person, so it's not, again, a one-size-fits-all approach, but there's a couple things to focus on. One is re-engaging with the community and making sure that they understand and everyone understands our work as prosecutors is in the courtroom, but it also begins with making community relationships outside of the courtroom. That's number one. Number two, making sure witnesses feel protected, making sure there's sufficient witness protection funds, and also something I've talked about, having some dedicated housing for short and medium term relocation in the event that we need to do that. And another thing I've mentioned on the campaign trail is making sure that witnesses feel protected at the moment that a case starts. Witness information often becomes public in a police report and becomes part of a case file early on. I would support legislation that would protect identifying information, address, date of birth, phone number, from people that are reporting crimes up front until all of the parties can determine whether or not there's protection issues, and people in the community have responded to that.
Just yesterday in Mattapan, after the triple shooting, the police commissioner, William Gross, says there are too many people with repeat gun offenses that are out too quickly. Do you think that's a problem?
One of the problems we always face as prosecutors is making sure we're looking at the case appropriately and understanding and assessing the risk that a person may have to the community. The purpose of bail is to ensure that the person responds and comes back to be held accountable for whatever the charges are. Part of the thing that I think that Commissioner Gross is reflecting is a frustration in the way that it's been happening. Prosecutors, when they stand up, and the prosecutors that would be in my office would be standing up and making a bail argument when necessary after assessing a defendant's record and understanding the nature of the case and the facts and circumstances of the case. And it is frustrating when judges are releasing people on very low-level bail on serious cases, and in many cases situations where a person has had defaults and has failed to show up in court. And I think that reflects the difference in the roles that we have. The prosecutor's job is to protect public safety, and we swear an oath to protect the public. And so that's what we do, and that's our guiding principle when we go into an arraignment and we determine whether or not to request bail.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Greg Henning, candidate for Suffolk County District Attorney.